Okay, welcome to today's session where we're going to introduce mdclone version 6. My name's Chris Sorensen. I'm from Bernard Becker Medical Library, specifically from Data Management and Sharing Services. And you can find us at becker.wustl.edu/DMS. And we also, in the meeting today, have some folks from informatics. The Institute for Informatics is who hosts our instance of mdclone. And we also have a clinical specialist from mdclone here on the call to help us through as well. So what we'll cover today, I just have a few slides where I'll give a brief overview of mdclone for any of you who have not used it. Then I'll talk about what's new in mdclone version 6, and then the majority of the time will be spent building a query in mdclone version 6. And as I mentioned, you can ask questions throughout the entire time. We should have some time at the end to ask some questions as well. So as an overview, mdclone is a free self-service platform here at WashU. It allows you to build queries to create what's called computationally derived or synthetic data sets. And how this works is you run your query on real patient data, and then the mdclone creates a synthetic data set using a proprietary algorithm, and the properties of the real statistical properties from the real patient data are not different from the synthetic patient data set. And actually, this article that's cited here by Dr. Randy Foraker and others actually did that exact test where they queried mdclone and got a synthetic data set, ran their statistics on that, and after they ran their statistics on the synthetic patient data, they compared their results to the real patient data. And so the synthetic data, it actually does not contain PHI, and it's not considered human participant research. So you actually don't need IRB approval, which is one of the big selling points of mdclone. You can actually get access to data with similar statistical properties as real data without going through IRB approval. Now, as I mentioned, this article, the authors compared synthetic data to real data. So when they went back and got this real data, then they had to get IRB approval, but they were able to get this synthetic data and run their stats without going through the process of applying for a IRB approval. And how mdclone works here at WashU, we have an mdclone data lake. And first, I'll just mention that we have a free 1-hour consultation with the data broker. So as you'll see when we're building this query, it often, the first time you go through to set up your query, you may not get exactly what you're expecting or exactly what you want, or some things maybe are hard to find. You can work with the data brokers because even though mdclone, I believe, it's very user friendly and it's very intuitive, but sometimes the challenge is trying to identify all the features, all the variables you're trying to extract, and also telling the story of your cohort that you're trying to get, how they would move through their interactions with our electronic healthcare record. So just to give you some more information about this data lake, so it's data from 2000 to present. It's refreshed monthly, and on our on the mdclone webpage from the Institute for Informatics, there's this mdclone data inventory. It has facilities and types of data found, and so I just did a screen grab of one of the tables there where it shows the different facilities and how many visit counts there are from each of these facilities. And I will send this PowerPoint out to you, to everybody who registered afterwards. And these anything that's in this blue font that's underlined, these have hyperlinks. So up here you have a direct hyperlink to the request help form that you can request a consultation with the data brokers. Okay, so mdclone version 6, some of you I know have used version 5 in the past. So you'll notice, first of all, this is a screen grab from right when I start to make a query, and you'll probably notice that it looks a lot different than the user interface from version 5. And so a lot of what the process that you're going to do is it's going to be similar, but it has a much different look and feel. And specifically, it's a much more intuitive design, and it really guides you through really the 5-step process to go from just starting your query to getting your final cohort and output and actually having a spreadsheet with data. And it also has a smarter search engine that allows you to search, use search terms that are very general or very specific. So you could use something as general as cancer, or you could have a very specific diagnoses that you're searching for. And everything stays on one page, and you just navigate through these tabs at the top. So on the old version, you may know the reference event and additional inclusion are on one page. These two are on another, and you have to kind of click back and forth. And even the summary review is on another page, and you have to click back and forth. Now they're just on tabs. And so how this is set up is the first two tabs where you define a reference event and add inclusion criteria. That's when you're defining your cohort, or specifically the number of rows that are going to be in that final spreadsheet that gets output. And actually, it would be your rows, one less than your final rows, because you'd also have a column or a row at the top that has your column titles. But this is where you would say, I'm searching for, let's say I'm searching for all people who were diagnosed with diabetes between the years of 2010 and 2000 and the end of 2019, so that whole decade. And I'm looking for people who have been prescribed metformin. That could be an additional inclusion. So that's how I'm telling mdclone, this is all the people that I'm looking for. This is all the people that I'm looking to find. And then the next two are when you're defining your output variables, or you can think of this as how you're defining your columns. So in the first two, you're saying, hey mdclone, here's all the people that I'm looking for, and then you're saying, hey mdclone, here's what I want to know about these people that I have found. So that's when you say, I'm looking for all people with diabetes in this range that are on metformin, and that also were later diagnosed with uh, a foot wound, or maybe had an emergency room visit or something like that. So you're adding on to your columns. And then you can also define some demographic variables such as race, ethnicity, gender, things like that can get output. And then I don't have a little box for this one, but here in Finalize Cohort and Output Definition, you just get an extra chance to look over the variables that you've chosen. It shows how many rows or what percentage of a variable is 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 available to you. Sometimes if there's a very small number of people who have a specific variable in one of the outputs that you picked, you'll not be able to see those. Those will be blinded to you because of patient privacy if there's too small of a number of patients that have a specific diagnosis or a specific visit type or something like that. And we'll see that when we get to that page. Here's also where you can add some your own calculated variables or categories, or you can say if exists. So if you were looking for an emergency room visit, you could add an additional column of data that says, give me a 1 if the person did have an emergency room visit, or a 0 if the person did not have an emergency room visit. And then you would have a column that's completely populated, as opposed to back here where if we picked emergency room visit, some of those column or some data points in that column may be blank because people didn't actually have emergency room visits. And we'll go through all of that when we get to the demonstration. Okay, so query demonstration. So if you go to the informatics mdclone webpage, you'll see 4 published articles on that webpage. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to build a similar cohort to what these authors built. So these authors were looking at heart failure patients admitted in the decade ending on the last day of 2018, and they extracted 27 clinically relevant features, and they used deep learning and machine learning algorithms to predict proximity to catastrophic heart failure deterioration. Now, my knowledge of deep learning, machine learning, and catastrophic heart failure deterioration is pretty much it's contained to what's in this. It's contained to what's in this bullet right here. No, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I'm not an expert by any means on any of these things. But I can still go back here to this article and still try to find the same or similar cohort to what these authors found. And you could do a similar thing if there was, if you saw an article from another institution that used MDClone, and you had an interest in that same type of cohort, you wanted to run an analysis on patients here, you could do a similar sort of query and build that cohort. Now, one of the reasons I bring that up, though, is that if you're like me and you have a research background rather than a clinical background, you didn't spend a ton of time entering or extracting data from an electronic health record, it's really important that if I was planning to get this cohort, run some analyses, run some statistics, and publish a paper, I would really want to have a content expert specifically on this heart failure as I'm building my query, because some things they just may have a better sense of where to find certain features or how somebody's clinical course would progress, so that they could help me try to cast the correct net to get all the patients and all the features, data for all the features that I'm hoping to extract. And I will put, in case some of you didn't get this, you don't have this, I'll put this link in the chat before we switch over. But now I'm going to go ahead and switch to mdclone, so you can do the same if you are, and we're going to go ahead and go through this. And I have something in the chat. Okay, there we go. We have Melissa put the link to our mdclone or the informatics mdclone webpage in the chat, and as I've mentioned here, let me jump out of here and I will go ahead and put the link to this article also in the chat in case you did not get a chance to download that. But now we're going to switch over to mdclone, and so this is what you should see when you log in to that syntheticdata.wustl.edu/mdclone. And this page looks relatively, this part of it actually, looks a little bit similar to the page that you came to in the old version. You still have some of the three dots over here where you can go in and edit. You could create a duplicate of a query that you've already created. You could share a query with someone else. You could send a query to someone else. One thing to distinguish between sharing and sending, if I shared a query with you, that would mean we are collaborating on the same query. And if you make an edit to it, it will be edited in my view also. If I send this to you, it's almost as though I've sent you a copy, and then if you make changes to it, it doesn't affect the query that I have in my query list. Okay. I'll also point out over here under help and guides, so it's probably up like this for you right now, but if you click help and guides and then you click on user guide, you get a really comprehensive PDF here, 139 pages going through every detail of mdclone extensively. So if you're looking for help, maybe trying to get some data, trying to get some data for a grant at the last minute, and you send an email, but you need something faster than that, you can refer to this user guide. And I should also mention on the mdclone link that on the informatics webpage that Melissa put into the chat, there are some really great training videos from mdclone on this new version, so you can access those as well. Okay, so now we're going to create a new query. So I'm going to go ahead and click the big purple button here and say create new query. And while that's coming up, I'm going to bring up this table 1 here in that article that I just linked to and I sent out earlier. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through and see how much of this we can replicate. This table 1 has everything that they output. And it may seem like a lot, um, but I'll just kind of tell you here, some of this, actually about half of this first column here from age at event down to severity is all going to be based on this source diagnoses. Okay, so the table is not in the perfect order of what we'll do in MD clone. That's just kind of the nature of how just it how you build your query in MD clone. The intuitive way that works is just a little bit different than how you generally find your tables laid out. So you have gender and race, which those will be demographic variables. So we'll do those a little later. But everything from age at event here down to severity, a lot of these are just output variables based on the diagnoses type that we're going to find. And so what we're going to do is we'll just go through and we'll find all these cardiomyopathy diagnoses that these authors have put here into table 1. We'll find a lot of output variables around those, and then we'll move on to BMI, blood pressure, and see how many of these we can get output during our time here. Okay, so here we are on this first page. We're going to define a reference event, but quickly we'll just give this a name. We'll say heart failure, proximity, and I'm going to give mine today's date. And now we have our query has a name. And then here, I'm just going to search, because I know there's a number of cardiomyopathy diagnoses that I'm looking for, I'm just going to go ahead and search for that. Hopefully I spelled it correctly. Okay. And so this is, it gives us every category that this is found in, cardiomyopathy. And you can see how often it appears in each of these. Now, this condition's not in use. This is something from the previous version here. We're not going to use that. We're going to use the actual condition here. So go ahead and if you're following along, select condition. All right. Now, by default, mdclone organizes these by usage, so how often they appear in the EHR. So you can see other primary cardiomyopathies, cardiomyopathy unspecified, very high number. Normally, this is the really useful way to go when you're searching for things, because what appears the most is that can really inform which of these that you want to check to get the data that you're hoping for. For our case, because we are going, we're trying to replicate what somebody else did, and we have that in a table, I'm going to organize these A to Z. And then I'm just going to go through here. So I know we have cardiomyopathy unspecified, and I'm just going through here on table 1 that I just showed and going through these. And then we had dilated cardiomyopathy. We have an other cardiomyopathies. We have secondary cardiomyopathy. Let's see, secondary cardiomyopathy, and then secondary cardiomyopathy. It has comma unspecified there. So I'm going to go ahead and take both of these. I can't tell if it was one or the other, but I'm just going to go ahead and take both. And then we have cardiomyopathy due to drug and external agent. Let's see if I can find that. There we go. Alcoholic cardiomyopathy and cardiomyopathy and diseases classified elsewhere. And then it looks like we have nutritional and metabolic cardiomyopathy. Now, in the table, it says diagnoses types, and then it says EG, and it has the list. So they may have others. They may have others that are included in here that just weren't listed on that table. But for today, we're just going to go with what they have in that table, and I'll go ahead and apply selection. Now, if I was, again, if I was moving towards some other type of analyses, this would be a good time to maybe reach out to the authors and just confirm that I'm searching for everything that they search for as well. And now I can add a filter because they only wanted the dates from the decade that ended at the end of 2018. So I can add a filter, and I just clicked this event filter here, and then it says type or select property, and I'm just going to select problem onset date. And it, by default, it selected year. So I'll go ahead and say for a condition, I'm going to say is between. And we had a question, is it possible to look up based on ICD-10 or CPD codes? Yes, yes you can. If you know the code, if you know an ICD code, you could just actually type that directly into that search bar. There's actually another, one of the articles on that informatics MD clone page, they actually list the ICD-10 codes. And when I tried to replicate that one, I just went through and typed those codes directly into the search bar, came right up. So yes, that can be done. So I'm just going to say 2009 to 2018 for our dates here. Now you could change this to date and you could get a specific, you could go, actually now that I've done it, I might as well. I believe it was 2009. So I could do January 1st, 2009 to December 31st, 2018. So now we have our range here. So we're looking for anybody who had one of these cardiomyopathies between 2009, 2018, so those 10 years. And down here at the bottom, anytime as I'm working through this, I can go ahead and select calculate cohort. And it's just going to tell me how many rows I've got just based on these two search criteria. Well, actually 3 search criteria because I have 18 to 120 here listed for age. And hopefully we get an answer soon. But as this is thinking, please feel free to type any questions. There we go. Okay. We got about 25,636. And can you upload ICD codes for a condition? I don't believe so. And for Michelle, if you have anything to add to that, feel free to go ahead. But I think that would be something that would have to be done in the background of MD clone by the data brokers.
You're correct.
Okay.
But we can go to a higher category where you might find codes that were all within an umbrella on, a section of the codes that could be grouped as an ICD-10 block. So there are some options to make it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But you cannot just upload all of the cardiomyopathy from a CSV file, for instance. But that's a really great suggestion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michelle. So we got about 25,636 people here, and I believe the article had about 1,000 more people than that. They had 26,000, somewhere in the 26,000, mid 26 range. So maybe there's one category here we didn't get, or maybe not quite. Maybe they did from January 1st, 2008 to 2018, but we're pretty close. That's a pretty good sign already. If I had everything the exact same, I would actually expect my number to be higher because data gets added every month. So I would expect my number to be higher since it's more recent, but there could just be something that I didn't do exactly the same as the authors of this paper. But that's totally okay. So this is all I'm going to put on my reference event here. And then I'm going to move to my additional inclusion. Again, so when I'm here on additional inclusion, so you could think of this, so it's inclusion, but you could use it as kind of inclusion or exclusion criteria. But let's just say, for example, I only wanted people who fit this reference event and that also smoked. And let's say I wanted to do that, define manually, or that they've smoked at some point. And so I could say substance conditions, and I could do event filter, um, and I could do tobacco status, smoking, and is any of the following. And I did search a different way this time. So rather than just typing in smoking, I went to define manually. And that was partly because I knew a little bit what I was looking for here. Now this does not go along with the table here. So I'm just giving you an example. Let's just say I wanted everyone who had been a current smoker or a former smoker, and I could apply this selection. And then let's say I'm only looking for males. Let's just say, you know, maybe this specific type of heart failure event is way more common in people who have smoked and people who are male. So I could add a demographic filter here of people who were male, gender at birth, and I'll just select anything that says male. And then at that point, I could run this cohort again and should get a smaller number. And the smoker may, you know, some of these are not always documented perfectly in the EHR. So some of these may cause a big decrease if you're using them as additional inclusion criteria. So you can see my cohort got cut by over a third, or you know, I've got less than a third of the number of people now than I did originally. But we're not going to include these filters. Later, you're going to see we're actually going to include this as an output variable. We're going to get people's smoking status, not this exact current or former, but we're going to export their smoking status. But this is just to show you how you could further refine your cohort as you're defining it. Let's see, somebody said tobacco status select condition I don't have. Is any of the following. So what you might have, so if you're here, hopefully it goes to any of the following. If this says tobacco status smoking, there could be, there's also smoking in conditions. And that one may come up with something different. Oops, maybe it's just smoke. So there's smoking in conditions. So if you went to conditions, you might get a different, a different drop down there. So there's different diagnoses here. But I would suggest using the rather than conditions, I would use substance consumption and then go to tobacco use. If you still went to substance consumption tobacco use and you still didn't get the ability to say any of the following, just shoot me an email and we can maybe try to troubleshoot that at a separate time. But for now, we're actually going to delete all of that inclusion criteria because that's actually not in the article. I just wanted to show this additional inclusion criteria tab and how it changed our cohort. So actually, let me click these three dots over in the upper right hand corner where it says event menu, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So it shouldn't affect the demonstration right now, even if you're not able to, even if you're not able to, even if you weren't able to get to that point. Okay. So now that we've defined, so essentially, since we don't have additional inclusion and we've defined our reference event, we're done here with our cohort definition. Now I've gotten rid of our additional inclusion, so let me do cohort definition again, and it should get us back to that original number, which I believe was about 25,500, 25,600 in there. And so now we'll go to our time-related events. Oh, it's going to have me sign in again. So I may have just briefly lost connection to my VPN, which is why that happens. That usually doesn't happen. Okay, so when we do our time-related events, our first one is our cohort reference event, and then we're going to put other time-related events here on this one. It's such as BMI measurement, blood pressure measurement, atrial fibrillation. We're going to put all of those as time-related events. You could also have things like looking for a specific measure. So earlier I talked about finding a cohort of people who have diabetes. So maybe you're looking for people who've had an HbA1c over a certain amount or something like that. So you can do a lot with these time-related events, finding other other features within the EHR relative to your cohort or your cohort reference event. Now, before we add more time-related events, I'm just going to go over here. So you have this event definition, which is exactly what we did on our first page. But then we have output columns. So let's go ahead and choose that. And we've got a number of these that we can take care of. So if I go back to my table, so if I look here, let me just blow this up a little bit. So age at event, that's actually going to be our age when they were diagnosed with heart failure. Visit group and visit type, we'll be able to find those in our output variable. Diagnosis type, same, and then same for facility, present on admission, principal problem, problem class. These are all things, even down to severity, these are all things that are just output variables related to the source diagnosis. So that takes a little bit of know-how with mdclone if you're doing what I've done here, where I just found, just took an article that's been published and try to reproduce this. So just for example, when I first came through, I was looking for present on admission in the EHR and or searching for it the way we search for cardiomyopathy. And then when I worked with Michelle, who's the clinical specialist from mdclone, she's the one who pointed me that these are just, we just have to check an extra box here related to the source diagnoses. So let's do that now. Okay, so we already have reference age at event. That's already picked. Encounter type and so visit group, let's see if we do visit type. Okay, so we had a visit type in there. This cohort reference not in use, we don't need that. We don't need that. Let's see, condition type, we'll keep that. Condition source diagnoses, so that can be our diagnoses type. That'll be all the different cardiomyopathies that we had. Facility, so we have a facility. Actually, I need to click this show all here. So then we can find our facility. And then we have present on admission and principal problem. So principal diagnoses here, diagnosis. Type, let's see, I believe there's a present on severity. I know we need that. And I think I'm just missing if it was present on, right, oh, there it is, right above principal diagnosis. Okay, there we go. So now we have present on admission. So I think we've got everything on our table down to severity here in our output. If there's anything I missed, that's okay, because we've got a lot of output here for this demonstration. So this is everything that we're outputting here from related to our cohort reference event. And now this is every one of these that has a check mark. This is going to be a column title. Okay, so this whole thing, cohort reference event and age at event, will be my column title, and that's pretty big. So let's change this. So if we go up here to column prefix, I can change this. Let's just say I'm changing this to heart failure, HF. And so now my output, my columns related to this will be much shorter. They're just HF, age at event, condition, condition type, so on and so forth. Okay, now we're going to add a new event. And I believe we have a question in the chat. We can filter based on ICD-9. Can we filter by CPT? I'm not sure. Michelle, do you know? Can you filter by CPT?
We
Procedural
do
codes?
get CPT codes for procedures, surgeries, things like that. So procedures, Chris, our CPT codes are related to
Oh,
procedures
yeah.
or surgeries, and ICD-10s are
Great.
diagnoses. LOINC codes are labs. Any of
Okay.
that standardized nomenclature, when we do receive it from the source system, which is, from Epic or from any of the legacy systems, we do include those. But I will say that they are not always 100% populated, but you do have that option to search on those.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
All right. So the next thing we come to on our table, we have BMI. So I'm going to go ahead and define that manually, because if I go to event or get here and I'm looking at my options, I actually have measurement for BMI, height, and weight. So I can just go ahead and select that. Now, every time-related event you create after your cohort event, you can create a timing definition. So as you read through here, this is saying get the first BMI at and after the problem onset date. Okay, so this is basically saying get the first time the BMI was recorded into the electronic health record at the time that the person was diagnosed with heart failure or after. Now, if that is exactly what you want, then you can just go ahead and move on to your next to your next time related event. However, I'm if I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about I want the BMI for these people who have heart failure, I probably want it kind of close to this problem onset date. I don't really want it out here like you know the next BMI after someone was diagnosed with heart failure could be way out here if they didn't have any any visits. It could be months or years later. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this at and after to ever, because as you can see here, this is before, at, or after. And then I'm going to narrow my range. So I don't want it to be the first time there's ever a BMI in this person's EHR. What I want is I want to try to get it pretty close to this actual date here. So I'm going to set timer on slider. And once I do that, I then get this, I get these options here. I get these units where I can go hours, days, months, years. So right now, by default, it has me 100 days before or 100 days after. And again, if that's good enough for me, I can move on. However, let's say, I talk to my content expert and they say, when somebody is leading up to heart failure or shortly after heart failure, maybe their weight can fluctuate a lot. And so if you went 3 months before and 3 months after, that might just be too much time. Somebody's weight could fluctuate too much. So maybe it's something like 30 days. So we want to try to capture a BMI within 30 days before or after that event. And I can narrow that down that way. And so This automatically saves whenever I create a new one, but let me just click save and see if this, what'll happen here is over here in this left column, it's going to tell me the percent of my cohort that has this populated. So 73 to 80% populated here when I go 30 days before, 30 days after for a BMI. So again, maybe I'm going to say that's good. You know, getting 73 to 80% of the BMI measures of my cohort, which is 25,000 people, I'm good with that. I can get some really good, you know, I can, that's enough data for my, to run my statistical test, or, you know, maybe I'm going to do some imputation afterwards, and 73 to 80% populated is good enough. And especially, as I mentioned, if the weight fluctuates a lot, before or after that heart failure event, um, perhaps I have to stick with this 30-day regardless. But maybe if it was more important to have more data and less important to have a narrow range, then maybe I go back to that 100, because maybe, you know, as I mentioned, I'm not a content expert for heart failure, but maybe their weight is pretty steady. Maybe their BMI is pretty steady for 3 months before and after. So if I go further out, maybe I'll get more data, but we'll just have to see. But that just shows you how I can try to capture uh, BMI around the time. So yep, you see I got a little bit more data. So we'll just go with this. We'll say we're okay with collecting BMI 100 days before, 100 days after, and we're gonna move on from that. Actually, before we move on, we'll go to output columns, because it only wants a few things. They only exported a few things from BMI, which was age at event, and then average calculated BMI. They didn't take the height or the weight or anything else. One thing you might want to add here though is and we'll just go ahead and keep this. We'll say measurement date, days from reference. We'll keep that, because we just want to know, you know, whether a person was, their BMI was taken 1 day before the heart failure event, or 90 days, or whatever we're interested in there. And then the next thing we're looking for is blood pressure. Where are you seeing the percentage of cohort with BMI? That's over here in this left-hand column, right here with BMI, 79 to 80% now that I move those to a wider area. And you'll see the cohort reference event is 100%, which that should always be 100%, because that's what we're trying to find. So all of our, you know, 25,638 people should have this, because that's what we're looking for. And then this is the percentage of these 25,600 rows that are going to be populated with a BMI, or have at least a BMI measure included. If there's some that are really high or really low, we might not be able to see those due to patient privacy. But I'll show that here in a minute. So we'll move on from BMI, and we will add a new event. So go ahead and select a new event here. And we will select, we'll give this a name. We'll just call this blood pressure, or BP. Sorry about that. And I'm going to define this one manually as well. And I think, again, you'll see the reason why. It's because when we go down here, we have a measurement category here for blood pressure. And so again, here by default, it says first, at, and after, and it could be any. So if that's what you're hoping for, you want to get the first one after, or maybe you want a blood pressure that happened at or after, but you don't want it to be too far. You know, you don't want it to be months and months after. You want it to be within a certain period of time. So let's say we want the first one 30 days after, 30 days at the time of or after. Again, you know, seems like probably a big range. Maybe we'd even want to go, you know, within 7 days or something, or even 3 days. I'm not sure, depending on how stable that is at the time. And they may even they may you actually may want a blood pressure that's not around this time, in which case you could do something like this. You could say maybe blood pressure is um, very susceptible to change during these first few days after a heart failure event like this. And so I do something like I'll give a 90 here, and I'll say I don't want anything in that first week. So I'm saying I want the blood pressure from 7 days after that first event to 90 days after that first event. So we're trying to capture it sometime, um, from 1 week to 3 months after, where we're trying to stay out of this range where maybe the blood pressure is um, more susceptible to changes. But again, this would kind of depend on knowing the clinical course of these patients, because again, maybe rather than wanting it before, it might be another case where you want to try to grab blood pressure uh, close to the date before, or maybe even leading up to but that. So you could say, I only want it the closest one 90 days before the attempt, as opposed to 90 days after. But for today, let's just leave it at this, just so we can have some variety here with our output. If we have a very low number here, then maybe we would just maybe we'd go ahead and redefine that. So we'll see what this percentage is that comes up here in just a moment. 47 to 53. So again, maybe based on, we'd have to make the decision based on how much data we need to run our analyses versus not getting data that would kind of throw us off. So we wouldn't want to take, if the clinical course, based on my example here, if there's a lot of fluctuation these 7 days after the diagnoses, maybe we don't want to do that. But since this is really just heart failure, it's not a surgery or something, or it's a heart failure diagnosis. It could be that this range would be a better thing to do. So maybe rather than leaving that, now that I've talked through it, maybe we'll just go with this so that we have a little bit more data there. We'll say again 100 days before and 100 days after. Okay, so the next thing we have is medications, or specifically steroid use here. So we'll go ahead, actually, let's go to output columns, forgot about this. So blood pressure, we have age at event, which they have, and then blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, systolic. And then again, in the real world, we may want to take this just so we know how close it was to the event. But for our purposes, because we're going to have a pretty big output file, let's get rid of this one for today. Okay, so now we're looking for to see if these patients have ever been on steroids, and we're looking for age at medication, age at event. So let's create a new event. We'll call this one steroids. And again, we'll define manually. So this is definitely, whoops, see if I can spell it right. This is definitely one where I would need a content expert, because I'm not sure what type of steroids they would be finding. But let's go to medication orders, and we could say event filters, and we could say medication. Now, if I just clicked here, I could come up and there'd just be, tons of them. That's probably going to take a few minutes. So let's do this. Let's see if we go steroids. And we'll just try to find something that makes sense here, because I'm not a content expert here. And we could even, so here we have very specific medications. We could see if there's any, if I could go up any higher. There's chemical subgroups, pharmacological subgroups. So I could look at these to see if I wanted to just cast a very wide use. So maybe something like this, maybe corticosteroids for systemic use. Maybe we'll just um, go ahead and select that for today and say that, well, if I wanted to do this, and especially since this is so common in here, you know, this is the one that's really high up there. We know we don't want dermatological, we want systemic use. So the usage frequency is very high here. So we'll go ahead and just select this one and say, you know, before we did our final statistical analyses here, we would consult our subject expert and make sure this is what we actually wanted. Let's go ahead and select this. And we'll just go ahead for today. All they have is uh, age at event, so we will select just age at event. And so there's a question, do I have to actively save these measures? It does actively save these measures. So if I go back here, so I did click save one time just to get this updated here. So in the upper right, you can click save at any point. But as I did this, it went ahead and saved for me automatically. Here I am at BP, so I'm back here at this. I can look at my I'm looking here at my previous measures or my previous output time related events that I created. So it is automatically saving all these. Now the steroids, so somebody asked if I could go through steroids. Basically what I did was define manually, and then I selected this medication orders. And then I there's an event filter, and I selected event filter, and I selected medication here. And then I selected any of the following, and I typed corticosteroids. Now that was kind of I defined that merit manually. I could have just typed corticosteroids into the search bar initially, and then gone from there. And when I came to this search, um, I actually it had very specific medications, and maybe if this comes up again. But what I did there, and I should have shown this earlier, is you can actually go up to higher levels. So the most granular part, so kind of the most specific you can get here on is the medication name. And let me just I'll go ahead and change this. But by default, when I went to medication, it came up to the exact medication names.
Chris, this is Michelle. I just want to
Yes.
mention that it's taking a long time because in this case, you just hit the magnifying glass, so it's going through many thousands
Oh,
of
yeah.
tabs. You can
Yep.
stay there, but
Mm-hmm.
just type the word corticosteroids where you see search up above,
Mm-hmm.
and that would have narrowed it down for you
Yep.
and made the search go more quickly.
Yeah, yep. And that's what I did the first time, which is why I went a little faster. Corticosteroids. There we go. So now to go a little faster, and it'll have the specific medications. And then if we don't want just the specific medications, we can click this drop down menu here at the top. And then we can go to kind of higher level categories here. So I went to pharmacological subgroup. And that's where I found this corticosteroids for systemic use plane. And I just went ahead and selected that. So let's go ahead and select a new event here. And just to show you, before I start my next search, just to show you what I did that last time was I defined manually, but I could have just gone straight in here and typed corticosteroids and had it come up this way and done my search there and gone to medication and searched similarly to how I did before, but it took me to medication name there again. But since we've already done that one, let's go ahead and click out of there. And our next one is valvular heart disease, VHD, and it has listed endocarditis, a few different types of endocarditis. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm just going to search for endocarditis. Oops, if I can spell it correctly. And I'm thinking this is in conditions, and it's telling me it's endocarditis valve unspecified and unspecified cause and endocarditis valve unspecified. So valve unspecified. Then there was unspecified cause, but maybe they're, so
It's at
this,
the top of the list,
oh,
Chris.
there we
There you
go.
go.
Okay, those two, I believe, okay, I believe we've got the two we need. So go ahead and select that, and we'll look at our output, and let's just say for these, we just want our condition because it doesn't specify. So we're just going to say condition for that. Then we'll have an echocardiogram surgery code. Oops, I need to give this one a name as well. This one is we'll call it echo, or I'm sorry, VHD. And then our new event, we will look for echocardiogram. Now it has a code, and so we've had a few questions about code. Let me see. This is straight from the table. It gave me this code. So let's see what we can find here. Nope. Maybe surgical procedure. Okay, using that code. Didn't, oh, I was looking, yeah, echocardiogram. So trans esophageal echocardiogram. So maybe this is the correct one. But let's try, see what happened if we just typed in echocardiogram. And so this is procedure description. And I'll use, there we go. We have just an echocardiogram. So we'll go ahead and grab that. Okay, and we'll call this one echo. For output, we'll just have procedure. Okay, next is kidney disease. I'm going to go through this one a little quicker, even if we don't get everything exactly the same, but I think we're probably starting to get the point here. So let's do this, and then I'll just type. We'll just see if I can do kidney. See if we get conditions. Let's just go to a higher code. So rather than go through and get the exact specific diagnoses, the source diagnoses here, let's go up to a category. And just for the sake of time and for the sake of what we're trying to accomplish today, let's just say we wanted just this category of chronic kidney disease, and we'll just go ahead and select that. And for our output, we'll just select source diagnoses. So we'll just have one column that tells us what their kidney disease diagnosis was. And let's do smoking or actually we will do creatinine. We'll do creatinine next. That is our lab measure. And then we've just got a few more and we'll move to our output. And while that's searching, there's a lot of comments here. is it possible to have gotten multiple echoes for each patient? So these last few searches I've done, I have not um, changed the I have not changed the timeline, but it by default it's going to get the first, I believe is what I had, but I'll go back and look at that in just a moment. So let's say we did so here we want creatinine and we're looking at, um, we want result in age. So let's try lab result unit of measure. Yep. Let's just try lab test. And let's say we want this creatinine um, mass per volume in blood. Again, can't really tell specifically from the table, but we'll go with that for our case, for our purposes today. Okay, and now to the question just a moment ago when we were talking about echo. So by default, since these early ones I changed this timeline here, and after that I've just been leaving it on default to get the first at or after. So the specific question was about the echo, and I left that as the default at or after. But to your point, perhaps we're looking for whoever had an echo leading up to their diagnoses. So we could say, maybe we wanted it close. We could get the nearest to the condition, but that would be before or after. So we could maybe change this to before, and we could say we want to see if anybody had an echo, within the 1 year leading up to within 1 year leading up to the diagnoses of heart rate. But then again, if maybe they don't get the echo until after, so then maybe we would want to do at and after, but and then maybe not 100 years, but maybe 100 days would make sense to say, let's see if any who got an echo 100 days after that, after their diagnoses there. So just quickly, I'm going to go through smoking and then atrial fibrillation, and then we'll get to our output page. So let's go ahead and create a new event. So we have the smoking. And here I'm going to define this manually because I know that there is a substance consumption. We'll say tobacco status. And we'll say if is any of the following, because we want smoking tobacco status and age at event. Actually, we wouldn't even, yeah, so right here we could select this, and looks like it has both smoking and chewing tobacco, chewing nicotine, um, unknown, never used. So we'll just check these first 4 or 5 at the top here, um, and we'll look for those. Looks like everything else is related to chewing tobacco. And now for this one, let's see, do they want it at or after, or we want the first at or after or around? I'm going to say, we want the smoking status as close to the time that they could have gotten it. So 100 days before or 100 days after. And then we'll also we'll search for our output columns. They have days from reference, but actually what we want here is smoking age at event and smoking status. There we go. And we can uncheck this one. So our final event will be atrial fibrillation. And for the sake of time, we'll just search for atrial fibrillation. And we'll go condition, and they have a list of different things here, but we'll just take this bigger category, atrial fibrillation. We'll make sure we have um, age at event, which is what they have, and then we'll just have condition. And then they have a number of things related to diabetes, but for the sake of time, we'll just skip those for now, and we'll come back if we have time. Okay, so we'll move now to demographics. Okay, so in addition to everything we just went in and found, we also want gender at birth and primary race. And we'll actually take primary race and then race is all, which is if people have multiple list multiple races. So we'll get those for our demographics. So now that we have all of our output variables from our time-related event and reference event, we'll go ahead to finalize cohort and output. And I will say, if this is the first time you're seeing this, this is a big query. My older sessions, past sessions, I've done not nearly as many time-related output or time-related events. I'm sorry, and so there's a lot here. So that we're going through a lot of different categories here. So when we get to this finalized cohort and output, you can look at everything you've chosen to output. And so actually, each of these rows is going to become a column when we output this. So this is describing a column. So our first column will be date of birth, and if we get here and we decide we don't want date of birth, we can uncheck that. And so it tells us, what the column name is, the category that we selected. You could change some of these if you wanted to. You could go to a higher level, higher category of source diagnoses here still, if you wanted. And then here it shows how much data are censored. Okay, so here where you see 34% of the data are censored for this specific output column, it's because there's most likely some people who have a combination of races that it's very rare in this data set. So rather than showing us, that a person checked these three or, two or three races, it will just have that censored, because if there's too few of people that have a condition, then they can't show that for patient privacy reasons. Okay, so this shows everything. This shows everything that we have. So what I'm going to do here first is I'm just going to go ahead and generate a synthetic data file, and then we'll come back to here and we will do a few other things a few other tricks that you can do on this page. So I'm going to go ahead and say generate synthetic. And here in a moment, I should get a little box up here that tells me this is working. And 25,000 is a pretty good cohort size, so it may take just a moment. Yep, there we go. So smaller cohort size, smaller time to smaller amount of time to take this. I'm going to go here and make sure I didn't miss anything. So if you wanted to get multiple echoes for each patient ID within that would be possible, right, as well. Yes. So there is a way. So for each output or each time-related event that I selected, I said get first. But you can change that to get a certain number. So you could say get the next 3. So you could say something like that. You could say get the next 3 echocardiograms after the diagnoses of after the diagnoses of uh, heart failure, or you could say the next 5, or get all of them. So you can get more than one echocardiogram. For today's purposes, I just did get first for each of those. But that's a good question. So hopefully my internet powers through here, and we'll get our synthetic data file here. Another thing, so while this is working, I'll just talk through what we're going to do next after this. So what we're going to see here is that some of these columns aren't completely populated. So for example, um, if we're looking at BMI, we have 66 to 85%, blood pressure 74 to 90%. Let's go here. So echo is going to be not very populated, 0 to 4%. So most of the columns or most of the rows we see are going to not have data in them for echo. So maybe for echo, instead of just having a lot of blank rows and a few that have data, we would want to create a variable that just tells us if there is data. So maybe a 0 for if there's no echo, and a 1 if there is an echo. And so what I can do here in this calculated column is I can click this, and then I can do if exists. And I can create a new column where it just tells me whether there's data or not in one of the other columns. So we'll come back to that in just a second, but let me just go to download synthetic here. This is now ready for download. So thanks for bearing with me there as our big cohort was brought together. Okay, so I'll go ahead and open this. Okay, so we've got a lot of censoring. Let's see here. Gender of birth. So it looks like maybe the censoring is just happening towards the top because it's telling us we shouldn't have much censored for gender at birth. Notice I unchecked date of birth, so that's not there. So let me just quickly add a filter here. And let's say if we get rid of censored. So we have there's still a lot of data there. So it looks like the first 100 cells out of our 25,600 are censored. So we could sort this. Looks like it's sorted from. Let's try this. There we go. So we could just sort it differently, and then we would have everything included. There we go. So there you can see, start to see our data here. We've got a lot of it. So here we have our demographics. Then we have our age at the event that the heart rate or the heart failure occurred. Then we have the type of diagnoses here. We can start to see this heart failure. These are all related to heart failure. Here's the facility. We can see the facility where the person had their encounter, whether the heart failure was present on admission. So maybe this is a good one when we go back to do an if exists. Maybe instead of having a variable, an output column that either has a yes or a nothing, maybe we want a 1 or a 0 here to make our statistical analyses easier. So then we have heart failure as a principal diagnosis. Same here. You'll see here, you have a lot of true false, but then you also have a lot of blanks. So if I got rid of, so you've got a lot of blanks, and then you have true false. So We have our BMI age, our BMI measure, and BMI, what we're going to do here is we're going to categorize these. So maybe instead of having just a number here, we want one that has a category of underweight, normal weight, overweight, and obese, and so on and so forth. And we can go all the way out here and we can get to our kidney disease, our creatinine, and we can see, how many people had an actual measure of creatinine. Okay, so it looks like there's definitely some values there. Um, yep, so it's not all blank. Okay, so we've given our initial look here at our output variable, or I'm sorry, our spreadsheet, our output file. Let's go back, and as I mentioned, let's add in um, whether that was the principal diagnoses upon arrival. So let's try this, and we'll do a if exists. We'll say um, HFs on arrival, yes or no. Present on admission. So we'll leave that. And you can either have this true, false, or 1, 0. And I like 1, 0s. That's easier to use for statistics. So we'll go ahead and choose that. And then if we go down here to the bottom, we can see that we have this if exists 1 or 0. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a category variable for BMI. So let's go ahead and do that. And we do that with what's called a custom expression. And we'll say, call this BMI categories. And what we do is we create what's called a case. And when we create case, it automatically has this syntax in here. And you can see if I hold this, I can get some explanation. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say when BMI is a certain value, then enter this into a cell. So let me just start typing BMI, and I'll say average calculated BMI, and I'll say less than 19. And we'll say this is, I'm not sure what the categories are, so I apologize if this isn't the current way to say this, but I'm going to say underweight. So anything under 19, we'll say underweight. And then I'm going to return to a blank line, and then I'll say when, and then I'll type BMI again. When BMI, and then there's what I can do here is I can say between numbers. So when BMI, oh, sorry, I did age at event. This should be, let me switch this. Average calculated BMI is between 19, 25. We'll say normal weight. We'll do one more line, another line here, and we'll say is between 25, 30, is overweight. So we have our categories, and then there, if we're saying then maybe everything 30, and I don't remember if this is 25 to 30 or to 35, but then we'll say everything else is considered obese. I'll go ahead and I'm going to click this little check button here is going to check my logic. I'm going to validate my code and see if that works. But I think you can see what I'm trying to get to here. Expression is valid. I'll go ahead and say save. And once this saves, rather than exporting everything, I'm just going to export a few of these columns that make sense. So we have our BMI categories and our heart failure on arrival. Let's just go ahead. Let's make this a little smaller and see if this will go a little bit faster. I'm going to uncheck these, any of them that aren't really necessary. We'll keep BMI in there. And we'll keep present on admission in there, but we'll see if this makes it go a little bit faster. But once I click generate synthetic, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. We're just going to look at this last, oh, looks like I timed out. I guess that's what it was asking me to do. Let's see if I can maybe refresh my page and hopefully I don't lose everything. But you could probably get to where we were going there. So we were going to have a column, any of the columns that were blank for the heart failure on arrival, or this, heart failure present on admission, that would have a 0 in my column down here. And if there was data in there, then I'd have a 1. So let's see. I don't think it's going to let me do it. It's going to say that I should have entered my username and password when I had that opportunity, when it popped up just a moment ago. But actually it looks like it maybe is going to go ahead and generate one for us. So for anybody who's still here, do you have any questions? All right. Well, as we wait for this, great. Thank you. And just a reminder, we have office hours on Tuesday from 10 to 12. So if you spend the rest of the afternoon trying to put together a query and you run into some questions, Tuesday morning, 10 to 12, there'll be a Zoom session open. You just have to go, you can go to the Becker webpage and you can put that in, or you can find the link to those, find the link to that. Okay, so this didn't work. The HF on arrival is a little different than I thought it was going to be. There was actually, so they could have had a no or a yes in there. So I've got ones for whether, as long as there was data in there. There's a 1 here for heart failure on arrival, yes, no. So that was a mistake. I would want to we can I would want to rethink this. This is probably not the right, at a minimum it's not the right the name for this column. It would just be maybe data on heart failure for arrival if I was going to leave this column in here. But maybe echocardiogram would have been a better one to use this on, to say yes or no for an echo. But hopefully you can see where I was going with that, but it didn't work out the best. But here you can see, so for BMI here, this person's 19.9, so their normal weight. Oh, so I made a mistake here too, because I said anything that didn't fit into their, classify as obese. So even these that are blank, I they say obese. So what I should have done is one more line of code that said, if this is blank, leave this blank as well. And so I could have done that. But you'll see anything that doesn't fall into the underweight, normal weight, or overweight is going to get classified as obese, even if it's blank. So that's good. This shows you just kind of the iterative process. So now I could just go back in to my custom expressions here, and I could fix that. So I could add in an extra line here that says when BMI, let's see, equal blank, then blank, and I could see I hopefully that would work, but I'd have to look up to see if that's the correct way to say equal to blank. So yeah, that's probably not that's not going to work. So maybe it doesn't even need those, or maybe I would have to
Chris, you do
go.
have the option for is empty over there. So if it's empty, then you could just say not
There you go.
specified, perhaps would be the,
Is empty,
but yeah,
then
there's usually a little
there we go.
option. It does take an iterative process, as we said.
Yep. There we go. So I'll leave that one. We'll just leave that for now. Know that, yep, that was just I go didn't go all the way through my logic of what would happen with this else obese for the um, blank one. So somebody asked if we could get images added. That would be a good question if you have if you end up having a consultation with anybody from the data brokerage or the research data core, you could talk to them about that. But I don't know if you'd be able to get, um, I think, not sure if they'd be able to have if they'd be able to have all the data. They may be able to have sort of if exists or that sort of thing for images. But it'd be a good question for the Institute for Informatics there. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to close this and see if anyone has any other questions. That's really all I wanted to show for today. We'll have more sessions. What I'll probably do moving forward is just have sessions like this where I find articles with um, where they have similar queries, and we can go through and see if we can and build a similar query. So thank you all for attending. Feel free to send any questions my way or stop into office hours um, Tuesdays 10 a.m. to noon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.